This is Iowa Talking Points, The Candidates, produced by Studio 5 at Mud Advertising, Totally Iowa Media, and News Talk 1540 KXCL, where you hear from the candidates in contested races in the June 2026 Iowa primary election. Now, Iowa Talking Points, The Candidates. From Studio 5 at Mud and Cedar Falls, here is Jeff Stein.
Hello and welcome. There will be a new U.S. Senator representing Iowa in Washington in January of 2027. It's an open seat due to the retirement of Senator Joni Ernst after 2 terms. There are 2 Democrats seeking their party's nomination to be on that November general election ballot, and one of them joins us at the Iowa Talking Points table today. Zach Wahls is currently a state senator, first elected in 2018. You find out more at his website, zachwahls.com. Senator, thank you for the time.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I referenced you as a senator, member of the state Senate. You're seeking I guess it would be a promotion. Some would say Washington, that could go the other way, but You're seeking to be a U.S. Senator.
That's right.
Why? Why make this run?
Well, first of all, let me just say it's great to be here, and to everyone watching at home, thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Zach Wahls. As you mentioned, currently serving my 2nd term in the Iowa State Senate. I was first elected in 2018. I was 27 years old, the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate at that time. 7 years later, 34 years old. I'll be 35 on Election Day. And it was funny, a few weeks ago, I gave my retirement speech to the state Senate because I'm not seeking re-election to that body. It's a weird thing to give a retirement speech when you're 34 years old. But the weirder thing was that at 34, I am still the youngest member of the Iowa State Senate. And when we win this thing in November, I will become the youngest member of the United States Senate. And I believe it's time for new leadership for our state, for our country, and for the Democratic Party. For far too long, we have seen leaders in both parties write off states like Iowa. That's certainly true for the Democratic Party. You look at Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, who said on national television, this was a couple years ago, that it's fine for Democrats to write off rural and blue-collar voters who will just make those votes up in the suburbs. And that math might work in New York. It definitely does not work in Iowa. And frankly, that is not the Democratic Party that I want to belong to. During my time in the Iowa Senate, I've been really fortunate to have the opportunity to represent not just big cities. I live in Coralville, right next to Iowa City. My district also included all of Cedar County to the east, and some of Muscatine County had a lot of small towns, rural communities. I got to learn a lot about some of the challenges, but the opportunities facing a lot of the places that Iowans call home. I've been able to be an effective legislator in the Iowa Senate. I've always been willing to fight for the things that I know are right and that are best for my constituents, for the values that we all share. And when you look at what's happening in Washington right now, it's clear that Iowa needs a fighter who will take on leaders in both parties, put our state first, and bring some long overdue generational change to Washington, D.C.
So let's talk a bit, since you mentioned the national party, the Democrats, sort of ignoring rural areas.
Yeah.
And certainly with regard to the caucuses most recently, Iowa was pushed off to the side. How can you demonstrate to people on that national stage, should you be elected, that a representative, a U.S. Senator from Iowa, actually can make a difference and affect the change that's necessary?
So growing up, I'm a 6th-generation Iowan. My mom, Terry, was a 5th-generation Iowa farm girl from Clayton County up in the Driftless area. Spent a lot of my weekends and holidays as a young kiddo spending time up visiting my family farm. And my grandma Lois moved into town after my grandfather John died in 1993. And it's a beautiful place, very special to me. It always feels like home. And when you think about the challenges that we are seeing in a lot of our small towns and rural communities, but this is true for our entire state as well, a lot of those problems are the result of decisions that have been made in Washington that are hurting states like ours. For the last 50 years, we've had an approach to farm policy and agriculture through administrations of both parties that have really pushed the consolidation, kind of getting big or getting out of farming. And I really say since the farm crisis, things have never quite been the same. When I talk with folks who are my age in their 30s or in their 20s, they feel like they have less opportunity than their parents or grandparents did. And I'll tell you, if my grandparents were still alive, they would not recognize what has happened to our state, the level of consolidation that we have seen, the fact that 70 of Iowa's 99 counties are losing population. And so many many of those problems start with decisions that are being made in Washington. And so, someone who believes that leadership begins by example, it's what I learned becoming an Eagle Scout when I was a young man. We've been trying to lead by example in this campaign, showing that a different approach is possible. For us, that means making sure that we're not accepting corporate PAC money. I made a promise to only serve 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. We know that rotating the crops is good for our soil. I believe it's good for our politics as well. I've also made a promise, if elected to the Senate, that I will not own, trade, sell stocks, cryptocurrencies, what have you. Trying to restore the trust that people should have in our government, believing that our government works for us, not just our senators or representatives trying to grow their own bank accounts. When you can bring that change to Washington, when you can fight for the things that are important to Iowa, a farm bill that actually works for our state, reversing the cuts to Medicaid, $800 billion that is going to be devastating for our small town hospitals, clinics in rural areas. Making that change a reality is just the first step of rebuilding that trust, but I think it's an incredibly important step, and that's why we're trying to lead by example in this race.
Now, you just mentioned health care and its impact in rural areas. What are some of the other issues when you have suggested that Washington has failed places like Iowa? What are some of the other areas that you would be raising your hand at the caucus and say, we need to address this?
Well, so we talk often about how this economy really has been rigged. We see, prices we all know are higher than they've ever been. And the president said during the 2024 campaign that they were going to take steps to lower costs on day one. They've done exactly the opposite. I mean, you look at these tariffs that are now in place that Ashley Hinson has voted for on 4 different occasions. Those have increased costs for our ag economy. They've increased costs in healthcare. They've increased costs at the grocery store. They've increased costs for prescription medication and so much more. And so we're all feeling the squeeze, whether it's at the grocery store, the gas station now with this war with Iran, this in the price of gas, diesel, fertilizer through the roof. Those are all policy decisions, and those are policy decisions that can be reversed with the senator who is willing to fight back against what is happening in Washington. And I would tell you, that is a perfect example. You look at Representative Hinson, of her putting the party line over what's best for Iowa. You cannot look me in the eye and tell me with a straight face that this tariff policy has been good for Iowa, that these Medicaid cuts are good for Iowa, that cutting hundreds of billions of dollars at a time when farm incomes are already struggling from food assistance is good for Iowa. And it's not just the folks who are going to go without that assistance. You're talking about farm incomes, you're talking about grocery stores where a lot of young Iowans work their very first job, stocking shelves, bagging groceries, working behind a cash register, the folks who drive the trucks to get those products to market. That hurts all of us. It's not good for Iowa. It's not good for the future that we want to build for our kids and our grandkids. But I think that future is worth fighting for, and that's what I'll do in the Senate.
Obviously, if there have been cuts in some areas and you want to restore funding, you're going to either have to take it from somewhere else, or that deficit is going, and it's going to be $40 trillion before Election Day as it is. So how would you reprioritize spending?
So fiscal responsibility is incredibly important. I've been in the state Senate for 8 years now, and we have seen what happens when you have the prioritization of tax cuts for the ultra wealthy over having the right programs in place to support hardworking families. And you don't have to look any further than the Republican budget, the so-called big, beautiful bill that passed Congress last year. That bill gave Elon Musk, other billionaires, the biggest tax cut in history. And in order to pay for that, they cut $800 billion from Medicaid. They cut hundreds of billions from food assistance, from investments in clean and affordable energy. I know that a lot of folks watching at home have probably noticed your utility bills going up. That is a direct result of these decisions that were made to cut investment in those energy sources. And so we can reverse those cuts by reversing those massive tax giveaways to the wealthiest people in our society. And I would say I think it's time to go one step further. I said that I would support the 5% wealth tax on fortunes worth $1 billion or more. When you do that, it's going to allow you to expand healthcare coverage. It's going to allow you to invest in affordable childcare, to protect Social Security, and so much more. And that is fundamentally just a question of making sure that we have balance in our economy so that folks who are in the middle class, who are working class, have economic opportunity, and that folks who are retired can trust that they will have a secure, dignified retirement in their golden years.
Let's talk about that retirement since you brought it up. The Social Security Fund is going to be insolvent during the term of the next U.S. Senator, and there will be mandatory reduction in benefits as a result. So What would you do? What would you suggest be done to prevent those mandatory cuts from taking place?
That is exactly why earlier this year I introduced our Keep the Promise proposal to keep the promise of Social Security. That calls for three specific things. Number one, to scrap the cap that is currently in place, so folks only pay into Social Security on the first $186,000 of their income. Now, obviously, most Iowans make a lot less than that, but it means that folks who are the wealthiest in our society continue to pay into the solvency of the trust, which would extend the solvency of the trust for decades. Number two, we need to reverse the cuts that we have seen to Social Security and its operations. Cuts, by the way, that Ashley Hinson voted for as a member of the House Appropriations Committee just 2 years ago, and that Elon Musk and Doge cut 10% of the workforce of that agency. And then third, and I couldn't believe that this was true when I actually learned it, the current commissioner for Social Security is a Wall Street executive named Frank Bisignano, and he is only working part-time leading the agency of Social Security. This is an agency responsible for ensuring that those benefits get paid in full and on time, and he's doing double duty because he's splitting his time at the IRS. And so my plan says the benefits of Social Security are hard-earned, they are hard-won, and they deserve a commissioner whose full-time energy and focus is on delivering those benefits in full. And so the commissioner of Social Security has to work full-time. I think that's pretty common sense, and I think most Iowans agree.
And again, you know this, and many of the people watching know this, but the Social Security Administration handles far more than just retirement.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you look at the importance of the programs that they deliver, SSDI, other things. Those are essential programs. And I was stunned to learn that with these cuts that have been put into place by Doge, that again were voted for by Representative Ashley Hinson, you have seen the wait times to get those benefits approved increase by as much as 40%, 50% to get those claims processed and approved. You see wait times growing longer and longer to try to get support at some of these field offices across our state and all over the country. And look, I certainly believe that there are places where you can improve the efficiency of government, update systems, modernize things. Everybody supports that. What I don't support is cutting benefits, raising the retirement age, or taking a chainsaw to a project when you should be using a scalpel.
He is Zach Wahls, Democrat, seeking your vote in the June 2nd primary for the nomination of his party for U.S. Senate. ZachWahls.com is the website. More when Iowa Talking Points, The Candidates, continues in a moment.
All the great news talk programs you love from KXCL on your radio can be with you wherever you go.
I'm Todd Starnes.
This is Mark Levin.
I'm Tim Harwood.
Bill O'Reilly here.
I'm Kim Commando.
Hey, it's Glenn Beck.
I'm Jeff Stein.
Just download the free KXCL mobile app. You can find us in the App Store or Google Play. Make sure you never miss a second of the conversation. Download the KXCL app today. It's a great way to stay connected to where Iowa comes to talk.
One opportunity. Change your career. Mudd Advertising is hiring product specialists. $20 an hour, paid weekly. That's 52 weeks a year, plus record-breaking profit sharing. Let me repeat, $20 an hour plus record-breaking profit sharing. But we're just getting started. The best in the business, 401k, company match, gold standard health plans, on-site fitness center, generous paid time off, and so much more. Apply today and don't look back.
You're watching Iowa Talking Points, The Candidates. Here again is Jeff Stein.
And we continue with Democrat Zach Wahls. He's running for the U.S. Senate. ZachWahls.com is the website. We'll return to some of those issues, but tell us a bit about your background and what led you to public service.
So I'm had the good fortune for the last 8 years to serve in the Iowa State Senate. Some of the folks watching at home or listening may recall I first kind of got some attention about 15 years ago when I was a sophomore at the University of Iowa. I was studying civil and environmental engineering, but found myself in Des Moines defending my family because I grew up in a non-traditional household. I mentioned my mom, Terry, who grew up on a family farm in northeast Iowa. Also my mom, Jackie, a nurse from central Wisconsin. And Iowa, of course, one of the first states in the country to recognize marriage equality for couples like my parents. And in 2011, when I was a college sophomore, there was an attempt to reverse that Supreme Court decision by amending our state constitution. When I just gave a short 3-minute speech defending my family, talking about how we're really not so different from most other Iowa families. A video that went viral and kind of launched me into a very unexpected turn into advocacy and then running for office in 2018. But the reason that I felt like I had to be there that night to give that speech and to keep advocating afterwards was because growing up, I learned at a very early age that politics was very interested in families like mine. We had these culture wars, of course, in 2004, kind of going until that was all completed, in 2015. And, I'll never forget what it was like to want to see somebody fighting, for families like mine, sticking up for us when it felt like we needed a champion. I've tried to be that champion, not just for, the scared 8th grade Zach, kind of learning about this for the first time, but for my constituents who have needed a champion. I'm sure that we can get into some of those stories and some of those battles I've had to fight in Des Moines here in a minute, but that was what guided me kind of into this journey. And that commitment is why when my wife and I were talking about this last year, look, running for the U.S. Senate, our son was only 1 year old at the time. Now he just turned 2. Certainly not for the faint of heart, but at a moment when I think so many people are feeling across our state, across our country, scared, concerned about the future of our state or of our democracy, I felt like it was the right time to step up and try to make sure that we could have that champion in D.C.
This may sound like an editorial opinion on my part. Feel free to disagree, but it seems that civil discourse these days is anything but civil. And even at the time that you spoke up, I imagine there was some level of backlash. And again, when you advocate not just for your family, but others similarly situated or on any of these issues, again, it's not for the faint of heart. What drives you?
To really, for what it's worth, if that's an editorial comment, that's certainly one that I would agree with. Look, I would tell you there are issues where there are some just fundamental disagreements between people of different political parties or different worldviews. But I would also tell you that in my experience, both being an advocate at that time, a lot of what we were trying to do as I was traveling across the state, across the country, I often got asked to speak to some of the more hostile or skeptical audiences, and I always found that when you approach those conversations with some grace and some humility, when you are willing to answer tough questions that might be pointed or sometimes, in my view, wildly inappropriate, but you take those concerns seriously and you're willing to answer those tough questions anyway, people will often meet you much further along than some of the pundits out in Washington might think. And that was an experience that I brought with me to the state legislature and to my campaigns for it. And this is a good time as any, I guess I'll tell you, my very first year in 2019, you probably remember this, we saw these large out-of-state companies come into Iowa, start buying mobile home communities, trailer parks. And if you live in a trailer park, you own the structure, but you rent the land underneath. And so this one company from Utah was purchasing 15 parks across the state. 3 of them are in my district, 2 in Johnson County where I live, and then 1 in Cedar County, the more rural part of my district. And they were proposing these outrageous increases in the monthly lot rent, 50, 60, 70% in some cases. And I don't know about you, I would be very unhappy if my mortgage went up 70% next month because this was not over 2 or 3 years. This was literally from June to July. And I started hearing from my constituents about this. And even though I never lived in one of these communities, I could relate to what they were going through because I know what it's like to feel like there's a battle that you have to fight, whether that's the government or a big corporation from out of state. So I went to bat for my constituents. And we were able, as a freshman senator, I was able to get a bill through the Senate 48-0 to protect my constituents, to fight back against these big companies. But then that bill was killed in the House of Representatives by then state representative and now Congresswoman and my opponent in this U.S. Senate race, Ashley Hinson, who it turns out had these close relationships with the lobbyist that was representing that industry. And so as a freshman legislator, it was this very powerful education in the connection between the challenges facing so many Iowa families in this rigged economy and what I would call, frankly, the corruption of our politics by both big money and sometimes, frankly, insultingly small amounts of money. But that is part of why in this campaign, we have been so focused on taking on this rigged economy, fighting back against this corruption, leading by example in this campaign with some of these things that we've been focusing on, and then trying to talk with Iowans in a plain manner about how that same pattern is playing out in industry after industry after industry, whether it's healthcare, nursing homes, agriculture, and so much more. I know that we can do better than this. We deserve better in this, and we need a senator who's going to be willing to fight for those things.
I think it's fair to say that regardless of the outcome of the November election, the margin for whatever party has a majority will be small. And so it's going to require folks if anything's going to get done, to work across the aisle. You just mentioned an example from your time in Des Moines. Give us a sense of the skill set that you have that allows you to bring people together from disparate viewpoints, or at least to come to some common ground on key issues.
Well, I mentioned just briefly that experience after the 2011 testimony went viral, traveling around our state, around the country, being an advocate on what was at the time, I mean, less so today, seen as a controversial hot button issue. And that certainly informed kind of my approach to my political work now. Part of it goes back, even though I didn't finish my degree in engineering, you still in those early years get taught how to look at those problems from an engineering lens, right? You break things down into their parts and you just kind of solve it one problem at a time. And I've often learned that in politics, one of the biggest challenges is that you often don't understand the problems the same way. You look at the problems differently. And so finding that shared viewpoint on how you attack the problem is really important. And the final point I would say is just this, the importance of listening. I think representing small town and rural Iowa, that was one thing that I really took away from that experience, was that there are a lot of folks in these communities who feel like Democrats are not actually listening to the problems that they feel like they are experiencing in their communities. And you have to be able to not just wait for your turn to talk, but actually listen to what you're being told. That's something that I think has become a real hallmark of my time in office. It's a hallmark of this campaign, and that's exactly what I'll do as Iowa's next United States Senator.
The old adage about 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Couldn't agree more.
Zach Wahls is our guest. He is a Democrat seeking nomination of his party for U.S. Senate. ZachWahls.com is the website. We're midway through this edition of the program. More in a moment as Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues after this.
One opportunity. Change your career. Mud Advertising is hiring product specialists. $20 an hour, paid weekly. That's 52 weeks a year, plus record-breaking profit sharing. Let me repeat, $20 an hour plus record-breaking profit sharing. But we're just getting started. The best in the business, 401k, company match, gold standard health plans, on-site fitness center, generous paid time off, and so much more. Apply today and don't look back.
Watch all the programs in the Iowa Talking Points series online at iowatalkingpoints.com. Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues with Jeff Stein.
And we continue with Zach Wahls. He is a Democrat seeking his party's nomination for U.S. Senate. The primary election is June 2nd. ZachWahls.com is the website. You have an opponent in this primary election. For an Iowa Democrat who's going to the polls, or for an independent who will register as a Democrat to participate, separate yourself from your opponent in the primary?
Well, even some Republicans. I know that there's got a Republican Senate or governor primary happening over there and a Senate primary. But look, from the beginning of this campaign, we've been trying to build a coalition that brings people together, Democrats, but also independents and even some Republicans. That's how we've been able to win the endorsement of 150 plus community leaders, elected leaders and counting. That's why I've been able to win the endorsement of 27 different labor unions representing over 30,000 hardworking blue-collar Iowans across our state. And that's the coalition that it's going to take to win in November. When it comes to Representative Turek, the other Democrat seeking the nomination, look, Josh is a good guy. He's got an inspiring life story. We do have some disagreements, strong disagreements on a few key issues, and I think a different perspective about the future of the Democratic Party. When it comes to the issues, I'm very proud of my record when it comes to reproductive rights and maternal health. My wife and I had some challenges when we were trying to start our own family. We had to work through 2 different miscarriages, and when we were experiencing that, it was a scary time. We were grieving. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to become parents. And Jeff, the last thing that we wanted in those tough moments was someone from the government reaching in to try and tell us in the doctor's office what we could or could not choose for our future. And so during my time in the legislature, very proud to have introduced 28 different pieces of legislation related to reproductive rights and maternal health. By contrast, my Democratic opponent had introduced 0 bills during his 3 years in the legislature before he decided to run for the United States Senate. And so I think when Iowa Democratic voters are trying to think about whose record do you trust to be a voice for Iowans, because we know that we are seeing attacks on reproductive rights, that we have real challenges with maternal health in this state, our records could not be more different in that regard. Immigration is another place of some real disagreement. This was a pretty prominent disagreement in our debate a few weeks ago in Iowa Press. In 2024, Representative Turek was one of only 3 Democrats to vote with Republicans in support of an anti-immigrant bill that Kim Reynolds had introduced that was opposed by law enforcement, the ACLU of Iowa, the Catholic Church, immigrant groups. They all came to the State House asking us to vote against this legislation that essentially required Iowa law enforcement to do immigration enforcement in our state, working with ICE to arrest, detain, and deport people who are in the state, including some people who are here legally. I listened to those folks when they came to the State House. I shared the concerns that law enforcement expressed, that this would erode trust in local police. So I voted no, and I spoke up against it during the debate. Representative Turek voted with Republicans on passing that bill. He has then since tried to defend that vote, making the exact same argument that Brenna Bird, our state attorney general, has been making in federal court, where that law has actually been struck down and ruled unconstitutional in federal court, and has been described by outside observers as one of the most extreme, discriminatory, unconstitutional anti-immigrant bills anywhere in America. Then finally, when it comes to our experience, I've represented, like I said earlier, small town and rural communities during my time in the legislature. I think it's really valuable for a state like Iowa. Representative Turek lives in Council Bluffs. And I know that out east, folks might think of Council Bluffs as a small town, 60,000 people. But no one in Iowa thinks that that's the case. So having the real experience of representing exactly those kinds of communities, of small towns and rural areas that are really the beating heart of a state like Iowa, I think is a real asset. I've served on the Senate Agriculture Committee, and I think if you look at the proposals that we've each put forward about our vision for the future of small town and rural Iowa, our ag economy, I think it's very clear which one of us has that real experience. The final piece that I would point to is that during my time in the Iowa Senate, I've been willing to challenge leaders in my own party. Anyone who knows anything about my background knows that I've got some scars to show for that willingness to challenge leaders in my party, certainly to do battle with folks on the other side, but most importantly, to challenge those powerful interests. We talked in the previous segment about my battle with some of those big predatory companies from out of state, and a lot of the battles that we have to fight in Washington aren't just about left versus right, they are about right versus wrong. And I've got a battle-tested record that shows that I'm never going to back down on one of those fights. But I will tell you that some of the toughest fights are going to be about the future of the Democratic Party. And we've got 2 options. We can either stay with the status quo, that's Senator Chuck Schumer and his approach of just writing off rural and blue-collar voters, or we can say no. That's not the Democratic Party that we believe in. It's not the Democratic Party that I believe in. I have said very clearly, I said on the first day of this campaign, that I will not vote to continue the failed leadership of Senator Schumer. I don't believe that he is being loyal to the values of the Democratic Party that has existed since the New Deal. And frankly, I don't think that he is meeting the moment when it comes to the assault on our democracy that we are seeing from this president. We learned just yesterday that the president's now going to have this $1.8 billion slush fund, essentially, of our taxpayer money that he'll be able to use to pay political supporters, go after his political enemies. And I don't think that Senator Schumer has done an effective job in fighting back in this challenging moment. I also think that when you look at how Senator Schumer has said on the record that we should write off rural and blue-collar voters, I just could not disagree more. But my opponent, Representative Turek, has not been willing to call for Senator Schumer to step down. He's supporting Schumer. And as a result, we've now seen an unprecedented amount of dark money flood into this state, into our nominating contest. The previous record was $1 million of outside spending in Iowa. That is now $9 million and counting, $8 million more. But the good news is you don't just win elections with money, you win elections with votes. And I know that we have a message that is resonating with people everywhere we go. That's how we're building a coalition, not just to win this nomination, but to win in November as well.
And I appreciate the correction, if you will. Republicans can certainly re-register as Democrats. And to your point, right now in the state, there are more Republicans than Democrats. There are more independents than Democrats. And so how do you then, in a general election, reach those groups, Republicans who may not be happy with their status quo, or, again, that large amount of us in the muddy middle that typically will decide elections?
Well, because I think so many Iowans, it's about the person, not just the party. And, I'll tell you, I know we're kind of in the northern part of the state. So I was the first candidate in this race, Democrat or Republican, to receive a grassroots contribution from Iowans in all 99 counties. And our 99th county was over in Wright County. And it was $25 from a gentleman named Gary. And when Gary got us to magic number 99, you can imagine how excited, of course, we all were to hit this milestone. And so we got Gary on the phone so I could just say thank you and express my my gratitude, and then, wanted to learn what was resonating with him about the campaign. What Gary told us was, he loved to see a new generation of leaders step up, get to work. He also really resonated with our anti-corruption message. We always talk about overturning Citizens United, getting big money out of our politics. We already talked about term limits, banning members of Congress from trading stocks, and that just really spoke to him. But then Gary told me a little bit about his own background. Gary's the president of his local school board, really cares about public education, not happy with what's happening in our state right now. Then Gary told me that he's a retired small-town lawyer. He's a Vietnam veteran. And then, Jeff, he told me that he's a registered Republican. And now he's actually not a registered Republican because he's just registered as a Democrat so he can cast his ballot for me on the June 2nd primary. Gary and his wife, Susan, have become two of our campaign's very best volunteers. And when we turned in our nominating petitions to get onto the ballot about 2 months ago, to get onto the ballot in Iowa, you need 3,500 signatures from across the state, and then you need 19 different counties with 100 signatures or more. Thanks to volunteers like Gary and Susan, we turned in 10,000 signatures. We didn't have 19 counties with 100 signatures or more. We had almost 40. And because of Gary and Susan, one of those counties was Wright County, and we had 174 signatures from Wright County, more than any Democrat seeking the nomination for U.S. Senate that we've been able to find on record. And that is the coalition that we are building, not just to win this nomination, but to win in November as well. Because, again, we're not going to agree on every single issue, but if we agree that we deserve an economy that works for us, not just the billionaires, that it is time to drain the swamp for real, this time in Washington, and that we need a new vision for the future of small town and rural Iowa, no matter who you are welcome on this team.
Let's talk a bit about that, because you alluded to a bit of backlash within your own party at times. And so it seems that voters say they want new blood, they want to fix what's wrong, and they elect people who say they will do that. Yeah. And as you found in the state Senate, when you try to stir things up, sometimes the people who are in your caucus don't like it very well. And so tell me what leads you to think that with all of the swampiness in Washington, and that's on both sides, not an easy role to take.
Well, look, the most important things in life are never the easiest ones. I think anyone who's ever worked hard a day in their life, or ever had a child, or been married, or so many other things can relate to that. But what I will also tell you is sometimes it only takes one voice to change a conversation. And I've learned that both the easy way and the hard way during my time as an advocate and in the state Senate. For 2.5 years, I served as the youngest ever Senate Democratic leader. It was not something that I ever thought I would do or ever kind of coveted. It was a surprise to me as much as anybody. I guess being an Eagle Scout, when that leadership opportunity was there, I felt like I had to say yes and to step up to do it. And there's certainly lessons that I learned from that experience. There are a handful of things I would have done differently, but I will never apologize, and I will never back down from my commitment to bringing change to our party so that we are able to reconnect with the voters who we have lost, so we can be effective advocates for the kind of change that we have to see in this state and in our country. And in the United States Senate, I will work with anybody to deliver that change for Iowans, and I will stand up to anybody, Democrat, Republican, third party, lobbyist, billionaire, doesn't matter to me. I will always do what I think is right for my people.
He's Zach Wahls. He's a Democrat, asking those who are voting in the June 2nd primary, registered as Democrats, to select him as the party's nominee for U.S. Senate. ZachWahls.com is the website. One more segment as Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, continues in a moment. Iowa has a wonderful heritage, and each day I'll share these stories of historic people and events with you. I'm Jeff Stein. Join me for the Iowa Almanac program, and learn more about this great place we call home. Now 7 days a week. Listen on radio stations across the state, via podcast, or at iowaalmanac.com.
One opportunity, change your career. Mud Advertising is hiring product specialists. $20 an hour, paid weekly. That's 52 weeks a year, plus record-breaking profit sharing. Let me repeat, $20 an hour plus record-breaking profit sharing. But we're just getting started. The best in the business, 401k, company match, gold standard health plans, on-site fitness center, generous paid time off, and so much more. Apply today and don't look back.
You're watching Iowa Talking Points, the candidates. Here again is Jeff Stein.
A few more minutes with Zach Wahls. He's a Democrat running for U.S. Senate, ZachWahls.com. Primary election day is June 2nd. So as you contemplate an agenda, if you will, or issues that are especially important to you, we've talked about many, but what are some of the things that, as a freshman, you could take to your caucus in Washington as examples of things that motivate you or would be beneficial to Iowans?
So if elected to the Senate, I will be sure to serve on the Ag Committee, which is a place where I think that I can bring some real experience, having previously done work on that committee in the Iowa Senate. And I think the voice of an Iowa Democrat in Washington would be badly overdue and very helpful to that conversation. And that goes back to some of what we were talking about earlier about the need for that new vision. The last 50 years of this approach of get big or get out has really not worked very well for Iowa. It's been great for the big multinational corporations that are doing better than ever, but so many Iowa farmers that I talk with are feeling the strain right now from this tariff policy that has been not just doing devastating damage to our export markets, but jacking up the cost of input costs like seed, fertilizer, potash, pesticide, herbicide, fungicide. If your combine breaks down, you need a new part, you need it to be repaired. Those kinds of things. All of those have gotten more expensive. You look at how the price or the share of the food dollar has fallen from 40 cents when my mom was growing up down to 14 cents today. The fact that in just these different parts of the ag industry, you've got 2 or 3 companies controlling 60, 70, 80, 90% of the market. That's not good for Iowans. It's great for their bottom line, but not for us. And so we need to have real enforcement of our antitrust laws. We need a new approach to conservation. We know that this water quality crisis is directly linked to the cancer crisis that we see in this state that is affecting Iowans, increasingly younger Iowans as well. And we put forward a very comprehensive plan to do that. You already mentioned ZachWahls.com. If you go to our Substack, we've laid out a lot of those very in-depth proposals. I'm definitely a bit of a policy wonk. And so if we are not able to get a farm bill over the finish line before I take office, and I hope that we are able to, but if we are not able, that's something that I'll be prioritizing. And then in the Senate, we will definitely have that next 5-year window, and I would hope that we'd be able to put a lot of these reforms that I'm talking about into that next package. And then if there's one other thing that I would have to push, it would be being able to have a public option so folks can buy into Medicare at an earlier age, to lower the Medicare enrollment age to 55, expand coverage to include dental, vision, hearing, and we can do all of that and more with the billionaire wealth tax that I talked about earlier. We know that the money is there. We just deserve and need to have an economy that actually is working for us, not just the people at the very, 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 very top of our society.
You've talked about what I'm describing as a rural versus urban split, and obviously Iowa City and Coralville bear little relationship to West Branch, for example, which I assume is also in your district. Yep. And so how do you balance? Because obviously everyone has needs, and everyone prioritizes their needs, and then you take it to a national scale and it's writ large. Yeah. So how can you convey to a voter that you understand the distinction and here's how we will make it work for everyone?
100%. So when I was first elected to the Senate, I represented Coralville, a couple Iowa City neighborhoods, Solon, which is in the north part of Johnson County, more rural area, all of Cedar County, which has West Branch, has Tipton, Clarence, Mechanicsville, Stanwood, Loudon, Bennett, Wilton, which is in Muscatine County, Durant. And that experience of getting to represent frankly, the widest array that you could imagine, right? Going from Iowa City, 80,000 people, urban, college town, to Bennett, population 311. It was an incredible opportunity for me. I was really committed every year. I held a listening post in every community that I represented, which, by the way, was frankly unthinkable to a lot of my Democratic colleagues who did not represent 15 different communities the way that I did. But I took that work really seriously because that's the job. The job is to be a representative of the people to the government, not to represent the government to the people, which is all too often in our politics. And so I took that responsibility really seriously. I talked earlier about the importance of listening, and that's something that I really think is a hallmark of a good legislator. And then having that ability both to work across the aisle when you can, but to stand up and fight for your values when that's what you have to do. And so I think that combined experience of having the good fortune of being able to represent small town and rural Iowa, suburban Iowa, Coralville is kind of a suburban area, and some of those being a bigger city like Iowa City, I got to get an understanding of what some of those challenges are. And look, some of the challenges are very different, right? You talk about the effects of, for example, this voucher program on public education. That is something that has a slightly different impact in a bigger area than it does in a smaller town. But frankly, doesn't matter where you live. Most Iowans really value our public education system. You see something kind of similar. This was a good example of this. We were down in southwest Iowa, Cass County, so back in October, for a roundtable with community leaders there. And one of the issues that came up was that the price for a new fire engine has tripled over the last decade because there's this private equity company that has consolidated what was previously a very competitive, very distributed industry, 40% now controlled by one company. And fire trucks are not an optional expense, right? Doesn't matter if you live in a big city or small town, or in a more kind of suburban setting. And so that consolidation, and I think it's been a theme of this conversation and frankly of this campaign. We need an economy that works for us because right now it's working great for those big companies, but it's failing everyday Iowans. And in the Senate, I will fight back against anybody who gets in the way of building an economy that works for us.
You're asking Iowa Democrats to cast their vote for you in the June 2nd primary for U.S. Senate. I'll give you our remaining time to make your case directly to them.
Sure. Well, thank you all so much for watching. My name is Zach Wahls. I'd be honored to have your vote on or before June 2nd if you cast your ballot early. In the Senate, I've built a reputation as someone who fights for the things that we believe in, is able to work across the aisle when it's possible. And in this election, we have to make sure that we have a candidate who can win back the voters that have been written off by national Democratic leaders like Chuck Schumer and those rural communities, those blue-collar voters. That is exactly the reputation that I've built in the Iowa Senate. I've been able to win the support of hundreds of leaders across our state, dozens of labor unions representing exactly those blue-collar voters. Together, we're going to build a coalition that can defeat Ashley Hinson, stop Donald Trump's assault on our democracy, and bring some badly overdue change to Washington, D.C. And I would be honored to have your vote on or before June 2nd, because even though I haven't won every fight I've ever been in, I've never backed down, and that's what we need in the Senate right now.
Mr. Wahls, thank you so much, Senator Wahls, for taking the time. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Zach Wahls is a Democrat, currently a state senator, seeking the nomination of his party for U.S. Senate. ZachWahls.com is the website. And that brings us to the close of this edition of Iowa Talking Points. The candidates, thank you for being with us.
This has been Iowa Talking Points, the candidates, produced by Studio 5 at Mud Advertising, Totally Iowa Media, and News Talk 1540 KXCL. For more information on this series, go to iowatalkingpoints.com.